is the Big Ten closing the talent gap on the SEC. So throw these numbers at me because the SEC once had a pretty significant lead over the Big Ten as far as players in the NFL draft. But what does history tell us about where the Big Ten is in trying to close the gap on what is the preeminent conference in college football? No question about it.
Yes, so for the 17th straight year, the SEC had the most players taken in the NFL draft. They led the way with 62. But for the first time in 5 years, the conference that was second was within single digits of the SEC. That was the Big Ten with 55 players selected. This is also the fewest number of draft picks for the SEC since 2018, 5 years ago. Now, the interesting thing was in 2018 and 2017, the conference that was closest to the SEC was actually the ACC, which this was peak Dabo Swinney. Florida State still had some residue left over from the Jimbo Fisher years of those ACC title teams. But now, this is the closest any conference has come to the SEC since 2016, which that year the Big Ten came within 4 players of the SEC. It was 51-47. I don't know what happened, Dave, starting in like 2019, but at the turn of this decade that we're in now, that's when the SEC just took their dominance to another level. And they lapped the field. This is the first year since the turn of the decade, I call it the COVID decade, that you would say that, okay, maybe the SEC is not lapping the Big Ten anymore. The gap is narrowing. Now, everybody else after the Big Ten, I don't think anybody else had more than 30 players drafted. So it's the SEC, Big Ten a close second, and then a massive drop-off after that. I mean, fueling your point that there's only 2 conferences that should matter in the sport right now.
Why do you think that is? If they are closing the gap, why do you think that is?
I think Jim Harbaugh has been recruiting at a very successful level at Michigan. James Franklin is actually starting to corner a lot of the Maryland DMV market. Obviously, Ohio State's Ohio State. They're turning out NFL talent no matter what. I think at some of the smaller schools, like Maryland, is recruiting well under Mike Locksley. They're actually getting a lot of DMV talent to stay in Maryland as opposed to going across the rest of the country. So I think that had something to do with it. As far as and also you have to remember, a lot of schools in the SEC have been in influx recently. We know Alabama, and we know Georgia. We know those 2 schools, but LSU just fired Ed Orgeron. Tennessee's 2 years removed from firing Jimmy Pruitt. Florida's a year removed from firing Dan Mullen. So there were a lot of programs that Auburn is 2 years removed from firing Gus Malzahn, and then just fired Brian Harsin. So I think there's been less stability among a lot of the SEC powerhouse programs in recent years, and there has been among the 3 top dogs in the Big Ten, which is Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. All 3 of those programs have had a pretty healthy level of stability ever since Jim Harbaugh and James Franklin came into the league. And so I think that's why that is.
I think James Franklin is a big part of it because he had ties into the SEC. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think that his ties into the SEC has helped him recruit. I should say Southeast. His recruiting ties has helped him recruit in the Southeast. But should anybody be worried if you want to point to the game that Ohio State probably should have won in the Peach Bowl? Georgia beat them 42-41 and had to hold on. I look at that game and I don't want to point to one game as setting the standard. I think that's more of an aberration. I think that Georgia showed up flat. I don't know how you show up flat, but I think they were overly confident in that game. How much do you place on that particular game as the Big Ten has closed the gap, if at all?
Not much, because I never thought there was too much of a gap between Ohio State and the top teams in the SEC with the talent level they recruit. I've always felt that if there was one SEC caliber team in the Big Ten, it's Ohio State, because they have a little LSU thing going where they're in a state that's top 5 in the country in NFL talent, and they're the only top dog in that state. Y'all can say Cincinnati now becoming Power 5. Don't make me laugh. Does anybody think a kid in Ohio is choosing Cincinnati over Ohio State?
No, if I were to argue against your LSU comparison, I would say that Penn State and Michigan are so close and they get into Ohio a lot. You could say the same thing. Again, I've said it, but you could say the same thing about LSU with Texas or Ole Miss or Mississippi State, but it's just not the same. I've covered recruiting. You're going to have to take my word for it. The kids that want to go to LSU or the kids that LSU wants go to LSU in the state of Louisiana. They just do. That's why Jansen Jackson, going way back, was an absolute stunner when Lane Kiffin pulled him out of Louisiana. We now know there may be some backstories about that. So,
which has to do with many Louisiana kids. I've read about this. Apparently, they don't have any family that's ever left that state. Whereas kids in Ohio, kids in California, particularly kids of African-American descent, we talk about the Great Migration, they naturally don't have their whole families from Ohio or California. Louisiana kids, a lot of times, whole families from there.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is with LSU, more than any other state, and I've said this before, you're going to keep those kids. So if the SEC is an A+, what is the Big Ten? And I think we would agree, right, that the SEC is an A+ based off what they've done over the past decade plus?
Yeah, what they've done over the past 20 years.
Okay.
An A+. It's been great for them. Hasn't been great for college football.
Probably. So the SEC is an A+. What is the Big Ten? I'll ask you that. Craft Treats, go to crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. Again, Off the Hook, get 20% off the Chill Pills or any of their fine products. With the Chill Pills, they've got CBD in them that will help with your dog's digestive issues. They'll help with arthritis. They'll help with all kinds of issues, including anxiety. The yip yips. We got July 4th coming up. Fireworks go off. Yip yip. That's my dog. Crafttreats.com. Use the promo code Off the Hook. The promo code Off the Hook at crafttreats.com. You'll be glad you did. So if the SEC is an A+, what's the Big Ten?
This year, I would actually say it was an A-, but right now I'd still say B+ overall because you got to do it more than 1 year. I think they're going to. I got to be honest, but I'd say B+. I think the Big Ten is a little top heavy. I will say this: the Big Ten East may be tougher than either division in the SEC. I mean, there's a very good argument that the Big Ten
top to bottom.
Yes, top to bottom. I mean, I would say there's a very strong argument that the Big Ten East is tougher than either division in the SEC. The Big Ten is not as tough as the SEC, though. I would say this for people saying, should the SEC be worried or anything like that? If you are worried about the future of college football, and I don't care whether or not you want what Dave wants, which is the 140-50 super team conference, or you want what I want, which is still more equitable distribution of teams across the country. Guys, it hasn't been good for the sport for the SEC to be this dominant. It's been good for the SEC. It's been great for the SEC, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm not denying the SEC is the most dominant conference and laps everybody else, but it has not been good for the sport. It's not, even if you're an SEC homer, you used to enjoy watching those late night Pac-12 games, feeling like there was some meaning behind those games 10 years ago. There's no meaning behind those games anymore. Who watches one of those games and cares anymore?
Caleb, I love you and respect you, but I 100% disagree. I think the SEC has been the New England Patriots of college football.
That wasn't good for the NFL.
I think that was. You had a team to root against for. You either rooted for the Patriots because you're a bandwagon fan, or you grew up watching them, or for whatever reason, or you're from New England, or John Pennington of the Sports Source, he was a Stanley Morgan fan from Tennessee. You've got your reasons, or you were a bandwagon guy. And to root against someone, to me, is passion. I sure as heck wanted to see them lose the Super Bowl and not finish the season undefeated. That was one of my favorite Super Bowls of all time. So I think that you've got fans out there in the Big Ten that love it. If Ohio State would have beat Georgia, they'd have been like, yeah, got you. And that would have been something. But Caleb, I don't think that – I disagree with you. I think it's awesome to have a villain, and the SEC's the villain.
Yeah, but the SEC is a okay, you would be right if like one team was a villain, like Alabama, because people do root against Alabama a lot.
Alabama's been pretty close.
Yes, Alabama as a villain is fun. But here's the problem is that, okay, in the NFL, yes, you're rooting for the Patriots to lose, but you still have a favorite team. So, okay, you're a Cowboy fan. You know It's funny to say, but no matter what NFL team you root for, there is like hope on the horizon that you could win the Super Bowl one day. Like you actually have a relevant NFL, every NFL team, there's hope on the horizon somewhere. The problem with what's happened with the SEC is not that they're the villain. It's not the dominance or the dynasty. It's that they've consolidated. They've been so dominant. And the recruiting in the South is so much better than everywhere in the country. The football in the South is so much better than everywhere in the country. And the college football playoff and the expanded playoff actually more nationalizes it and more exposes how dominant the SEC is. It's funny that the other conferences wanted the playoff because it's doing the exact opposite of what they wanted. But it's actually rendered college football irrelevant to a lot of fan bases that somewhat had hope. I mean, I can tell you this right now. I don't know if Oregon fans are going to care as much about college football in the future. Oregon's never going to be able to compete with the SEC. I don't care how exciting they are as a program. They will never compete with the SEC.
But they don't care like SEC fans already.
They cared enough. They don't care like SEC fans already because they know, unlike SEC fans, that their team never has a chance. And that's the thing.
I'm sorry, it's regionalized. There are better high school prospects out of the South. There's not in Oregon. They care about their track program, for the love of goodness sake.
It's good. Okay, so Ohio State knows they have a chance. Look, I think long-term, you're in danger of Michigan not caring that much. Dave,
Not caring about football?
Dave, Michigan has half a national championship the last 70 years. They're the most overrated program in any sport. We talked about Michigan going into Ohio. That's all they can do. They can't recruit at the level of Ohio State. They just can't. And I mean, had Michigan played Georgia this past year, had they gotten past TCU, Georgia would have done to Michigan what they did to TCU.
I agree.
And
I think that's good. I think that.
So then just okay, let's throw the Big Ten out. Let's just invite Ohio State in and separate from the rest of the country. Don't even let Michigan or Penn State in.
Okay, would Ohio State, because this post on the message board, would Ohio State and Michigan, well, let me just get to 4 downs right now. 4 downs is now.
4 downs. 4 questions. 4 answers. The Dave Hooker Show.
4
downs. A presentation of offthehooksports.com.
4 downs. Is the Big Ten catching up to the SEC based off what you saw in this last recruiting cycle and the Georgia-Ohio State game? Yes or no?
No. I think it's more about stability that the Big Ten is having right now versus the SEC had a lot of influx of coaches the last couple of years.
Agree. What makes the SEC better than the Big Ten?
Recruiting. Easy. I mean, the high school football. I mean, if you take the top 6 high school football states, one is California, the other is Ohio, and then the other 4 are in SEC country. And so, yeah, recruiting.
That was second down. It is recruiting, but it's somewhat coaches. Who's the third best coach in the Big Ten? I'll give you. I mean, Ryan Day, Harbaugh, are those 1 and 2 based off results? Who's 3?
I don't think Ryan Day is the top 5 coach in the Big Ten.
Well, but based off what he's done, you have to give it to him.
I don't do that. I never do that. I've never been one to do that because you and I could do that at Ohio State. It's an easy job.
I agree. So who's the third best coach in the Big Ten?
Okay, third best. Let's look at this. Well, now that he's there, I'm going Luke Fickell at Wisconsin.
Okay. Okay, who's the third best coach in the SEC?
There's Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly. You think Josh Heupel over Brian Kelly?
Coin flip. I like Brian Kelly a lot like you. Coin flip, I would take either over Luke Fickell.
Yeah, I would too.
I mean, so coaching is the secondary, but it is recruiting. You're right, but coaching's not far behind. Third down. Will the Big Ten ever catch the SEC? I think I know your answer is probably no.
No, mainly because the Big Ten, have you noticed the Big Ten got caught flat-footed with NIL? Not one of the Big Ten programs is top 5 in NIL initiatives, which threw me off.
All right, most importantly, 4th down, this is a possession down. How would Ohio State do if they were suddenly in the SEC?
They would do what, I mean, on a 20-year scale, they would do what Alabama, Georgia, or LSU does. Now, I don't mean like Alabama 6 national titles. Not Alabama. Let me take that back. Okay. On a 20-year scale, they would do what Georgia or LSU does. A couple of national titles, few conference titles. I mean, Ohio State is on that level as a program. If you look at like people that are like, oh my gosh, Ohio State would, barely be 500 in the – no. They would usually win 9 or 10 games a year in the SEC.
I agree. I think they'd maybe have a championship or two. But I'm not so sure that they wouldn't get beaten down by the week-to-week play of the SEC. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that would affect them in the playoffs and they would fall short in the playoffs, because I think they are a healthier football team because of who they play. As the message board said, SEC just hits different.
Yeah, but Ohio State's not Clemson. Clemson was not that deep. Guys, Ohio State is the one. They are deep like an SEC team if you look at the talent on that team. So, they wouldn't win they win the Big Ten like 5 years or 6 years in a row? That ain't happening in the SEC. Okay, that's not happening. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able, like you said, to win a national title here or there. Again, to do what LSU does. They would do what LSU does. LSU sneaks in a national title every few years.
Okay, I'm going to ask you what LSU would do in the Big Ten. It's brought to you by Vassy Lawn and Garden. Man alive, it's worth the drive. Vassy Lawn and Garden, industrial and commercial mowers right there in Cleveland, Tennessee. Worth the drive from Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga. Vassy Lawn and Garden. Go to Vassy.com to learn more. With their buying power, they will save you money. I can promise you that. Vassy Lawn and Garden, man alive, it's worth the drive. Toro, count on it. So what would LSU or Tennessee, for instance, do in the Big Ten? Because both of those, I believe, are up-and-coming programs where the ceiling has not yet been reached by their respective coaches. So if they were in the Big Ten tomorrow, how would they compete? Please hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, appreciate it. Love sharing as well. Hit the retweet if you can. So what would they do in the SEC or in the Big Ten, excuse me?
Okay. Is this assuming Ohio State and Michigan are both still in the Big Ten, both of them, or is this is
yes? And okay. this is LSU, Tennessee making the move tomorrow to the Big Ten. So yes. you have both programs on the rise. What would they do in the Big Ten over the next 5-10 years? Stretch it out however long you want.
LSU in the Big Ten over 5 to 10 years would win 4 to 7 at Big Ten titles and 2 national titles.
No, what about? I think Tennessee would too.
I think Tennessee would do a lot less than that. I think Tennessee would do somewhere. They wouldn't do as well as Ohio State has done in the Big Ten, but they do better than Michigan has done. Like, I don't think Tennessee can. Now, again, this is Ohio State this is a little unfair because Tennessee has a much better coach than Ohio State does between Josh Heupel and Ryan Day. Here's the question. What would Josh Heupel do at Ohio State?
Josh Heupel would do more than Ryan Day.
I agree. So if Josh Heupel's at Ohio State and Ohio State's in the SEC, guys, I'm sorry. Y'all can hate me all day. Josh Heupel, if Ohio State's in the SEC and Tennessee's in the SEC, and they have coaches of the exact same intellect, Ohio State does better than Tennessee. They just do. They're just they're in a better recruiting ground. Ohio State's a top 3 job in America. It's Georgia, LSU, Ohio State. Those 3 jobs.
I'll jive with you that those are the top 3 jobs, but I don't think the next step is a significant fall off. So I think Tennessee can absolutely recruit with the best of them. And people, that sounds crazy for somebody if you just came from Mars and looked at the recruiting territories. But I think Tennessee with Atlanta and all that nearby, and now Nashville, I think they can recruit with the best of them. And I think that's going to prove out as Josh Heupel continues to lay this foundation.
Natural recruits are scrubs. Y'all heard it here first. They're terrible.
Yeah, but I still think that's going to change, man. I really do. And I've been saying that for a few years, so I may prove to be an absolute idiot at that. But I do believe that that's going to be the case. So,
and there's too much competition in Atlanta. It's not like Tennessee can't get Atlanta, but you got to fight with Alabama, Georgia, now South Carolina, because they're out recruiting Tennessee at the moment as we speak. Clemson.
Well, we have somebody that's agreeing with you, but the wise man says, Caleb, things are changing, and they are.